Awesome. Pedro, you've got the first couple up.
Yeah, the first point about this issue, override squash commit message before merging, something that users have been crying about and people want it, and it makes a ton of sense, of course, and it's one of the most popular issues that we have in code review. And I put it here because I think that there might be a good way for us to iterate towards this. So essentially, what I think it's two things that are happening here. So on one hand, there's the necessity of the people that are not going to merge, or even they're going to merge, but nonetheless, the authors or developers of the merge request, they want to be able to set a merge commit message, or in this case, a squash commit message before the merge request is merged. One way that we could do that, although it would not fix the second problem, but the first problem to fix this could be possibly to add these fields to the edit merge request form in the same way that we already have the options to set the deletion of the source branch, or to say if you want to squash the commits, we could potentially add those fields there. But the second problem is that even if you have perfect squash commit messages or merge commit messages, those are not being reviewed before merge because they're hidden by default. And my assumption is that it's not so much the fact that they're hidden, but that the option is always there. So that it doesn't prompt reflection about something that just appeared to you. It's always there, and you're looking at the merge button, and that's the focus. And with all of the clutter of the UI, the ability to edit the commit messages gets lost. So this is actually a good segue, and I didn't know that Sanjung would share her proposal in point 3, but we were talking both of us today about this, and it actually connects very well with what she has next. And so I think we can connect both this issue with what she's doing and try to have, not fix it in one go, but at least have a plan of how we can fix most of these things together and then iterate towards that ultimate resolution. But I'll stop there for comments before Sanjung goes to her point, in case anyone wants to comment on what I just said.
I agree with a lot of what you said about like how it's presented. I think, putting it in the edit window sort of makes sense because that's the person who would sort of better know what those should be. I think the other question I have though is, this is like complicated, uncomfortable configuration question, is like, the other thing we could do is implement a project setting that says use title for squash commit message or use first multiline commit for this, which might broadly appease both groups who have different workflows built in different ways around this, and then it might be faster potentially than some of these other things that we might want to do. I guess my hesitation and risk is like, I don't particularly want another setting to deal with this, but it also feels like there is not a same default that everyone agrees is the same default here. So I don't know if like, and even our own engineers are now running into this based on the new changelog stuff. I know because we switched out the behavior underneath them while they were building a changelog feature, which is sort of interesting. But I don't know if you've thought about that side of it either. Like, what about the configuration option?
Yeah, I think that controlling the default could be helpful, but I think more than controlling the default is just being able to edit it beforehand. I think that's because that would solve all of the problems and not have to rely on the default. The default would just potentially make it faster for certain cases. Like, for example, let's imagine that the default is let's use the merge request title and the merge request description as the squash commit message. It can work for some teams. For other teams, they might not rely at all on the merge request title or the merge request description because, I don't know, could it be another thing? So they would always have to change the squash commit message. So I think it might be preferable for us to first go down the route of let's try to solve it for the widest audience first that captures all of or most of the cases. And after that, evaluate if we really need a project setting. Because as you said, it's another setting, it's another thing for us to maintain. And I think jumping to that immediately is, yeah, I think it's just jumping the gun too soon.
Do you think there's the flip side to that is like a project setting eliminates the need for any additional editing options or controls or views or prompts for this? Because and this is, let's just say, like, if you look at the two issues, the original issue that converted squashing to multi-line commits, and then this issue which converted, well, which wasn't going to do anything, and then a community contributor converted it to title. Like, those two seem to be like sane options for people. There doesn't seem to be like a third one who's like, I don't like either of these and want to like edit it. It seemed like most people had sort of designed their workflows and trained their engineers to be like, title of the merge request will always be it, and here's what you need to do to that. Or, and like, you know, the first comment in the issue is like, we had automation that like took the title of the merge request and appended this information to it, and like other things, like people built their automation based on that. And then the other group of people who were like, oh, well, we always just made our first commit like this, and we did, you know, fix up commits all the way to that, and that was sort of the only commit. Or, you know, maybe if there were other commits, but we always knew to like do this, and they trained people. And so you didn't have to review the squash merge request, the squash merge message, merge commit message, because you trusted the default already had what you had in there. And so like, I think what you'd be doing now is saying like, this is sort of devil advocate. If you go to a situation where we try and edit this all the time, or we present editing, or we present confirmation message, you're basically saying, don't ever trust what the squash commit is, and you should always review that, versus like the system took care of it for you based on like how the project runs.
I think that's fair that we'd like to fix to have the best default for everyone. And some teams would like to have the title and the merge request description, but other teams will not want to have that. And so we would still need to deliver the capability to edit the squash commit message, or as you said, like have a setting that turns on or off the default or whatever that is. There's yet a third approach, which is, and this is just an example. There might be others. So in GitHub, when you squash and merge, it actually takes, well, in this case, the two commits have the same message, but it lists out the commits as you would do with a as an optional extended description. So, and it takes, I think, the title of the merge, of the pull request. Actually, let me see if I can change it really quick. Right, so it takes the title and the ID, and it then lists all of the commits here for you. So this is yet another thing that actually is very reasonable, I think, for a team to have to do this if they are writing really good commit messages every time. They'd like to keep that history as bullet points on the commit message itself. So this would be yet another default, I guess, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't. Um, I don't have strong opinions about which is right, I guess is maybe the way to say that. But what I think we've seen is that teams have a strong preference about which is right. And to me, I think when we see that teams have a strong preference about which is right and are sort of not easily swayed, and we don't have a strong preference, like I don't, as the people not working in those projects, I can't tell you which commit messages are better or not, or more valuable or not, right? And I think that is very much a not a concern that we should have, or something that we should have a strong opinion about. Like, I think that's sort of personal. I think if we were gonna have a strong opinion, our strong opinion would be that like the multi-line commit is the correct one, because we think commit messages are important. But many teams do not think that commit messages are that important, as is evident by most projects and commit messages that you see. Even GitLab's own commit messages are not great. But I think when we see that there's so much contention there, to me, that feels like the breaking point for going to a configuration route and letting teams. This feels like one of those things that makes sense to give people a setting over. Like, how do you want your project's commit messages to always appear? Like, when you do this, how do you want that to happen? Because even if we put editing options in front of people, like one team is disadvantaged. If the box is pre-populated with title and description, anyone who doesn't want that is now disadvantaged, and their workflow is like hampered and longer and takes more thought, and their cycle time is therefore slower because they had to make choices and change things every time. I think the same is true if we made it the first commit message. Anyone who doesn't want that to be their default squash message is now at a disadvantage because of XYZ. And so this feels like one of those things where like, where as much as like I wouldn't, I think we'd all agree that we've got too many settings and too much going on there, but this feels like one of those things that is sort of meets the bar or the criteria that, like, if I were to loosely think about what would constitute that, like gets there in terms of like, let's put a setting in, let people decide. We don't want to inhibit people's workflows. We recognize that like all of these things are valuable. And then that gets us the immediate like fix for all of these groups. And then I think if there's further demand, right, if we see the next group of people who are like, oh, well, our commit messages should be some random formula of all of these things, like we say, okay, well, now we're into editing land, and like, we believe that like you should verify this, and like we'll put some editing pieces in and make that workflow possible. But I think that is a much more complicated workflow to do, than sort of just like adding a setting today and saying like, here's the default, you can switch between these two options, pick whichever one you want, and then move on from there. But it is a setting, and we've got to balance that out too.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. Yeah, we could equate it to merge strategy. Like some teams prefer merge commit, other prefer fast forward merge, and some teams really care about their their Git history being extremely clean. Others don't care so much about it, just care about the end result. And yeah, yeah, I think all of that is reasonable. And yeah, we've seen in that issue many differing approaches, and like my team prefers this, but my team prefers that. But it seems that everyone agrees that one, they should be able to override it before the merge, and two, that it's what you said, like they don't want this to be an impairment to their velocity and to have to think twice about it. So they'd like a default. But then, as you said, like one team wants this default, another team wants that default. So we might as well give them all of the defaults and they pick. Because I think you're right. I think it comes down to just the preference and how teams are, or how the team is processed in their workflow. Yeah.
Okay, so I would have two questions. One, just confirming. So like a setting we all sort of feel, and I don't know, Catherine and something you haven't spoken up, but we all sort of maybe feel that like a setting not ideal, but given sort of the circumstances might be okay. And then the second question would be, do we actually think it's a priority and something we should like put an engineer to go do within the next like 1 or 2 milestones or something?
Yeah, priorities are priorities based on their relative compared to other things. So I hard to say. I think what we're focusing on right now, the performance, is more important than this. That's my understanding. And there could be other things that are more important than this. But I think it's, if we come to an agreement, I'm hopeful that, and if we have a direction, I'm hopeful that of all of these people that find this issue very important to them, they could be willing to contribute something, even if it's just one of the settings, you know. But committing someone to this from our team right now, I don't know. But I'd like for us to, if possible, to deliver or continue delivering or addressing popular issues, and not just bug fixes and performance. Although the performance is popular with everyone, as we've seen, it's one of the top things. But yeah.
Yep, and to me, like, this seems like pretty important, but as Pedro mentioned, I don't think this is as much as important compared to what we are currently focusing on. I mean, performance. So I like the decision that we just discussed, like about having a setting option. I think that makes sense because it aligns with the organization workflow. So of course, we still have to balance adding one more settings option, but I think for this case, it'll work, but we can also think about maybe community contribution, or I don't know. But I agree with all the decisions that we have just discussed.
Yeah, I actually would forego the first multi-line commit. I never understood that. That is so. I mean, I understand that at certain point teams learned that and they are now working like that. But I That's very strange, I think. I didn't see in that issue anyone advocating for that on their own, other than saying like we started using this because this was the way to have the default as we wanted. You know what I'm saying?
Wasn't that the I mean, that's the logic of why it got changed to that, was based on when it originally changed to that, was that this is like the better form of a commit message. And it's like, I think what our teams rely on, it's what GitLab relies on, it's what I think they want to use for, I mean, I guess the question, okay, well, let me rephrase that though. So let me not try and advocate for it. What would be the other setting?
So there are people that want the description, other people don't want the description. There are people that want a list of the commits, like I showed you in GitHub. This one about the first multi-line commit, I have to dig through the past discussions, but I'm not sure it's something that someone asked. I don't know. I'll have to go and find it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would, we've never had those other options, I guess. We've never had title and description, and we've never had title plus other commit messages as options. So I would be hard pressed to introduce a setting that introduces things that never existed before, versus like introducing a setting for like changes that we've made sort of in product, if that makes sense that way. Like I don't want to, and I think that's like a slippery slope, and why we need to be cautious of the setting is I don't want to introduce the setting and then watch 3 more merge requests come in that add 4 other options to like that dropdown. Because that's not helpful to anyone. Like I don't want more opinions in that dropdown than like sort of the couple that we've had in the product before.
Yeah, I found the issue that has the first implementation of the first multi-line commit message. And before that, so that's when we allowed overwriting the squash commit message in the first place. And before that, what it reads in the description is that we were just using the merge request title at the squash commit message. It was the default when we had squash, and then we moved to this multi-line thing. But I'd have to read through that discussion.
Okay, well, we can, I think if we're gonna go the setting route, we should be very clear that like what the options are. But I don't want to go into like a here's 20 options sort of deal. I think 2 sane defaults based on 2 sort of like sane options based on commits which we think are valuable, or titles which are simple and short and don't potentially contain all the caveats of descriptions or like all these other things. Those have both been in the product, both for multiple years at a time, and so like those seem reasonable as terms of like things. But I don't think we should introduce like new things along with this. We should just sort of try and solve for the immediate thing. And I think if we saw enough demand for another default, like if we got another one that had, you know, a year's worth of comments and hundreds of upvotes and like sort of contention of like, hey, our team really needs this, like maybe that's the threshold we have to like add another option in there. But like we shouldn't sort of open this up with like multiple selections in a drop down or something like that. I think that's, I would be concerned if we did that. But we can figure that out an issue. And I know we're well over time. And so we can move sometimes to next week. Or do you need answers before 14 planning? Or do we need to look at this before 14 planning?
This is more like read only that I'd like to propose. It's not proposed, but I'd like to create an issue, like async design, create an issue within the code review team. And if you click the Figma file, there are some exploration and proposal almost ready to be reviewed. So I'm going to create a new issue and ping the whole team to gather more feedback and rework on it and start to plan for another solution validation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks. And sorry for running over so long on the other one. I don't think that was the intent, but yeah.
No worries.
Thanks, everyone. And
Thank you.
we'll chat again soon.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.